The look on Vanessa's face was absolutely priceless. Standing there on the deck of what she thought was her new beachfront paradise, wind whipping her perfectly highlighted hair across her shocked expression as the police officer explained the situation. My husband James stood beside her, his face draining of color while the truth sank in. The property wasn't his to offer, and hadn't been for nearly 6 months. They were officially trespassing. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I watched from my car parked across the street, sunglasses, hiding my eyes but nothing concealing my smile. The Silver Cove cottage that had been in my family for generations, the one I'd restored with my own inheritance money while James was working late, was mine. All mine. And the beauty of it? He never saw it coming, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it all began, to the day I discovered that the life I'd carefully built over 12 years of marriage was nothing but a carefully constructed lie. I'd always considered myself fairly perceptive. As a senior account director at Westview Marketing, I prided myself on reading people and situations, an essential skill when dealing with demanding clients and market trends that shifted like sand. Yet somehow, I'd completely missed the signs that my own husband was having an affair. It was a Tuesday evening in early March when I first noticed something off. James had been working late more frequently, which wasn't entirely unusual given his position as financial advisor at Meridian Wealth Management. What was unusual was the scent of unfamiliar perfume clinging faintly to his collar when he finally came home around 11 p.m. "Rough day?" I asked, looking up from my laptop where I'd been finalizing a presentation. James loosened his tie, not quite meeting my eyes. "The Richardson account is a nightmare. We're trying to restructure their portfolio before the quarter ends." I nodded, filing away the slight hesitation in his voice, the way his fingers fumbled with his watch, a tell he'd had since we first started dating in college. Something wasn't right, but I didn't push. Not yet. Over the next few weeks, the evidence mounted. Mysterious credit card charges at restaurants we'd never visited, texts that made him step out of the room to answer, and the increasing frequency of client dinners that kept him out until the early morning hours. I might have continued in blissful denial if not for the Silver Cove property taxes. As I was organizing our financial documents for the upcoming tax season, I noticed that James had taken over the payments for the beach house, the cottage my grandparents had left me, the one I'd renovated using the remainder of my inheritance. "Just simplifying things," he'd said months ago. "Since I handle all our other investments, it makes sense to consolidate." I'd agreed, touched by his thoughtfulness. Now, reviewing our accounts more carefully, I discovered he'd been paying the property taxes from our joint account, but had set up a separate savings fund labeled Silver Cove Maintenance that I had no access to. When I checked the balance, it contained over $30,000, far more than we'd ever discussed allocating for the cottage upkeep. My suspicions fully aroused, I did something I'd never considered before. I checked his email. We knew each other's passwords, transparency we'd maintained throughout our marriage, but I'd never had reason to use his. The guilt lasted about 5 seconds, disappearing entirely when I found the exchange between James and someone named Vanessa Cooper. "I can't wait to show you the place. You're going to fall in love with Silver Cove just like I did. Perfect for weekends away from everything. No one will bother us there." Her response, "Sounds dreamy. When can we make it official?" His reply chilled me. "Soon. Just getting the last details in order. Then it's all ours." All ours? The beach house that I'd inherited from my grandparents, where I'd spent every summer growing up, where James and I had spent our first anniversary, the property that was in my name alone. I scrolled further, my hands shaking, and found more. Photos of Vanessa, young, blonde, polished in that artificial way that screamed, "trying too hard," posing inside my cottage. my grandmother's quilts visible in the background, my renovated kitchen with its hand-painted tiles serving as backdrop to her pouty selfies. They'd been using my sanctuary for their affair. But what truly ignited my fury wasn't just the betrayal. It was the timestamp on the email thread discussing their future plans. 3 months ago, James had written, "I'm thinking we could make Silver Cove our permanent place by summer. Lisa barely uses it anyway. Once things are settled, it's just a matter of transferring ownership." Transferring ownership? Of my property? I shut the laptop, my mind racing. James wasn't just having an affair, he was planning to somehow take my beach house and give it to his mistress. The cottage that represented not just financial value, but my family heritage, my personal retreat, my future dreams. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 5 years. Instead of confronting James, which every fiber of my being wanted to do, I drove to Harbor Point Cafe to meet my oldest friend, Rachel Torres. "He's what?" Rachel nearly choked on her latte when I showed her the email screenshots. Her dark eyes widened with each swipe of my phone. "Lisa, this is beyond an affair. He's planning to steal your property." "I know," I said, my voice steady, despite the storm inside me. "The question is, what am I going to do about it?" Rachel leaned forward. "You confront him, throw his things on the lawn, change the locks. The classics." I stirred my untouched coffee, watching the cream create spiral patterns. "And then what? He denies it, we fight, everyone in Oakwood Heights gets to enjoy the spectacle, and he still tries to take what's mine. You get a divorce lawyer, the most vicious one in the state." "Eventually," I agreed. "But first, I need to secure what's already mine and make sure he can't touch it." That afternoon, I called my sister Emma, the only family I had left after our parents passed. Unlike me, Emma was an attorney specializing in property law. I forwarded her the emails, then waited. As silence filled the phone line, "Lisa," she finally said, her voice cold with fury. "This is premeditated. He's documenting his intent to defraud you of your separate property. The cottage was inherited, never commingled with marital assets, and the renovations were paid for with your inheritance funds. He has absolutely no claim to it." "Then how does he think he can transfer ownership?" I asked. "He'd need your signature unless—" Emma paused. "Has he ever had you sign documents without explaining them fully? Anything about the cottage? In the past year?" A chill ran through me as I recalled the refinancing papers for our main house that James had rushed me to sign 3 months ago, right around when those emails started. There had been a stack of documents, and he'd flipped through them rapidly, pointing out where I needed to sign while explaining it was just a better interest rate for our mortgage. "I need to see those papers," I told Emma, "and I need you to—" "Get your name off any joint accounts immediately," she replied. "Today." By the time James returned home that evening, I had already set my plan in motion. I greeted him with a smile and asked about his day, betraying nothing of what I now knew. "How would you feel about spending a long weekend at Silver Cove next month?" I asked casually over dinner. "I was thinking of doing some spring cleaning, maybe updating some of the furniture." James nearly dropped his fork. "Next month might be tight with work, and didn't we just renovate last year? It seems wasteful to keep pouring money into a place we use so rarely." "We use it rarely," I corrected, maintaining my pleasant expression. "I was thinking of using it more." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Maybe even working remotely from there during the summers. He frowned. "That doesn't seem practical. The commute would be brutal, and the internet connection is spotty." "I could make it work," I said, watching him squirm. "Unless you had other plans for the cottage?" "No," he said too quickly. "No specific plans. I just think we should consider the financial aspects before making any decisions. I nodded, as if his opinion still held weight. You're right. I should look through all the property documents and reassess. In fact, would you mind pulling those refinancing papers we signed recently? I want to make sure we didn't accidentally include the cottage in any of that. His face paled slightly. Those are all filed away. I'll have to dig them out. No rush, I said cheerfully. I can look for them myself tomorrow. That night, while James slept, I photographed every document in his home office. By morning, Emma had confirmed my suspicions. Buried in the refinancing paperwork was a deed transfer, adding James's name to the Silver Cove property. My hasty signature was at the bottom, a signature I now realized didn't quite match my usual handwriting. This is forgery, Emma stated flatly, and we can prove it. The next day, while James was at work, I visited 3 places: my bank, where I removed my name from all joint accounts and opened new ones in my name only; a locksmith, who changed the locks at the Silver Cove cottage; and finally, Bridgeport Law Offices, where I met with Daniel Wilson, the divorce attorney Emma had recommended. Based on the evidence of attempted property fraud and the documented affair, we have a strong case, Daniel explained, his manner calm and methodical. The forged signature on the deed transfer is particularly damning. We'll file to have it invalidated. Immediately. How long will that take? I asked. Normally, several weeks. But given the circumstances and the clear evidence of forgery, he said, examining the documents Emma had prepared, we can request an emergency hearing. Judge Harmon owes me a favor. 3 days later, with the fraudulent deed invalidated and a restraining order preventing James from accessing the Silver Cove property, I filled a small suitcase and left a note on our kitchen counter, taking some personal time at the cottage. We'll talk when I return. I didn't specify when that would be. What I didn't know then was that James had already promised Vanessa they would spend that very weekend at their beach house, a promise he apparently intended to keep, restraining order or not. And that's when my carefully laid plan would truly begin to unfold. Part 2. The planning phase. The Silver Cove cottage looked exactly as I remembered from childhood. Weathered gray shingles, white trim around the windows, and an expansive deck overlooking the water. Standing there alone, watching waves crash against the shore, I felt a curious blend of heartbreak and resolve. This place represented both my past and my future, neither of which included James anymore. My phone buzzed with texts from him, each more urgent than the last. Where are you exactly? We need to talk. Call me. This isn't like you, Lisa. I'm worried. I smiled at the last one. Worried about me, or worried about his plans falling apart? I left them all unanswered and instead called Rachel. Operation Beach House Revenge is in motion, I told her when she answered. I've been monitoring James's email. He's planning to bring Vanessa here this weekend to surprise her with their new vacation home. Even with the restraining order? Rachel asked, incredulous. He doesn't know about it yet, I explained. The court sent notification to our home address, and I've been collecting the mail. Legally, he's been served, but practically. You're diabolical, Rachel laughed. So what happens when they show up and find you there? That's just it. They won't. I glanced around the living room, at the family photos I'd already removed, the personal touches I'd packed away. I'm making some modifications to the place, then heading back to the city tomorrow. By Friday night, they'll arrive to find what appears to be an empty cottage ready for their romantic weekend. And then? And then, I said, feeling a surge of satisfaction, the trap closes. Over the next day, I worked methodically. I installed discrete security cameras throughout the cottage, connected to an app on my phone. I replaced my grandmother's quilts and family heirlooms with generic store-bought items. I stocked the refrigerator with champagne and groceries, a welcoming touch for the unsuspecting couple. Most importantly, I visited Arnold Reeves, the local sheriff and longtime family friend. Lisa, he said, greeting me with a hug at the Silver Cove Sheriff's Station. Been too long. How are your folks' old place holding up? I explained the situation as clinically as possible, showing him the restraining order and the documentation of the fraudulent deed transfer. Arnold's weathered face darkened as I spoke. I've known you since you were knee-high to a grasshopper. Your grandparents were good people. This husband of yours. He shook his head. Don't you worry. We'll be keeping an eye on the property. That's all I ask, I said. Just follow the letter of the law. With everything in place, I drove back to Oakwood Heights on Thursday, arriving home to find James packing an overnight bag. There you are, he said, attempting to sound relieved rather than caught off guard. I was worried when you didn't answer my calls. I needed some space to think, I replied calmly. The cottage always helps clear my head. He froze momentarily. You were at Silver Cove? Just left this morning, I confirmed, watching his mind race as he calculated whether he needed to change his plans. It's in great shape. Perfect weather this time of year. James recovered quickly. Listen, I have to go out of town for a conference this weekend. Investment opportunity in Boston. I tried calling to let you know. Boston, I repeated. Sounds important. Very, he agreed, visibly relieved I wasn't questioning him. I'll be back Sunday night. I smiled. Safe travels. After he left, I poured myself a glass of wine and called Daniel, my divorce attorney. Everything's set, I told him. James is planning to take his mistress to the cottage tomorrow night, and you've documented the restraining order with local law enforcement. Sheriff Reeves has a copy and is prepared to enforce it, I confirmed. What about our other legal maneuvers? The judge granted our petition this morning, Daniel said. The property is officially restored to your sole ownership, with the fraudulent deed transfer expunged from the record. Furthermore, given the evidence of attempted fraud, the judge has frozen the joint accounts pending further investigation. Perfect timing, I said, satisfaction warming me more than the wine. And the other matter we discussed? The private. Investigator's report is comprehensive, Daniel assured me. Photos, timeline, credit card statements linking your husband to Ms. Cooper going back 11 months. More than enough to trigger the infidelity clause in your prenuptial agreement. I took a deep breath. The prenup had been James's idea when we married, a protection for his future wealth, he'd claimed. The irony that its infidelity clause would now work against him wasn't lost on me. Thank you, Daniel. Keep your phone on this weekend. I have a feeling we'll have more to add to our case very soon. The next day, I checked into a hotel in downtown Oakwood Heights, far from our suburban home. From there, I monitored the security camera feeds on my phone, watching and waiting. At 6:43 p.m., a notification alerted me to movement at the cottage. I switched to the front door camera feed just in time to see James's car pull into the driveway. He emerged looking confident, then walked around to open the passenger door with a flourish. Vanessa stepped out, her expression a mix of surprise and delight as she took in the cottage. My cottage. I turned up the volume to hear their conversation. James, it's absolutely perfect, Vanessa exclaimed, clapping her hands together like an excited child. You weren't exaggerating about the view. Wait until you see inside, he said, retrieving their bags from the trunk. I had some updates done recently. All new kitchen, master bath with a soaking tub overlooking the water. Renovations I had designed and paid for with my inheritance. When can we move in permanently? She asked, threading her arm through his as they walked toward the front door. James laughed. Patience. There are still some details to work out. But soon. Very soon. And your wife doesn't suspect anything? He used his key, the old key that no longer worked, in the door, frowning when it didn't turn. Lisa. No. She's completely clueless. Always has been when it comes to these things. Hold on, the lock seems stuck. I watched him try again, then check under the flower pot where we used to keep a spare key. Finding nothing, he walked around to try the back door, leaving Vanessa on the porch. 10 minutes later, after attempting every entry point, James pulled out his phone and made a call to a local locksmith, claiming he'd accidentally locked himself out of his vacation home. The locksmith arrived 40 minutes later. "ID and proof of residence, please," he said when James tried to rush him into opening the door. "Look, this is my property," James insisted. "I must have grabbed the wrong keys." "Sorry, sir. Need to see documentation before I can open any door in Silver Cove. Town regulations." James produced his driver's license. "There, address matches the tax records." The locksmith shook his head. "Tax records aren't proof of ownership. Need to see a deed, utility bill in your name, something that shows you own this specific property." "This is ridiculous," James snapped. "I've owned this place for years." My phone pinged with another notification, this time from the sheriff's department. Arnold Reeves had received an alert about a potential break-in at my address. Perfect timing. I switched back to the security feed just as Sheriff Reeves's patrol car pulled up behind the locksmith's van. The trap was sprung, and I hadn't had to do anything but wait. Sometimes, justice works best when you simply create the right conditions and let people's own actions condemn them. Part 3. The Turning Point. Sheriff Reeves approached the porch with the unhurried confidence of a man who knew exactly what he was walking into. At 62, with salt and pepper hair and a weathered face that had seen decades of coastal storms, he carried an authority that even James, accustomed to controlling any room he entered, seemed to instinctively respect. "Evening," Arnold said, nodding to the locksmith before turning to James and Vanessa. "Got a report about a potential break-in at this property. Everything all right here?" James straightened his posture, adopting the smooth, slightly condescending tone he used when explaining financial concepts to clients. "Just a misunderstanding, Sheriff. I seem to have grabbed the wrong keys to my beach house. The locksmith here was just helping us get inside." Arnold's expression didn't change. "Your beach house, you say?" "Yes," James said firmly. "The Mitchell property. My wife and I have owned it for years." I watched through the security feed as Arnold pulled out a small notebook, flipping through a few pages with deliberate slowness. Mitchell. That would be Lisa Mitchell's cottage, inherited from the Parker family, correct? James's confident smile faltered slightly. "Yes, that's right. Lisa is my wife." "And is Mrs. Mitchell with you this evening?" Arnold asked, glancing at Vanessa, who had the good sense to look uncomfortable. "No, she's back in the city. Work commitment." James cleared his throat. "Look, Sheriff, I appreciate your diligence, but this is really unnecessary. Once we get inside..." "I'm afraid I can't let you do that, Mr. Mitchell." Arnold pulled out a document from his breast pocket. "I have here a restraining order prohibiting you from accessing this property. And according to county records updated just yesterday, this cottage is the sole property of Lisa Mitchell, with no secondary ownership listed." The blood drained from James's face. "There must be some mistake. I have paperwork." "The fraudulent deed transfer?" Arnold supplied, his voice hardening. "The one with the forged signature that's been officially invalidated by Judge Harmon? That paperwork?" Vanessa stepped back from James, her eyes wide. "James, what is he talking about? You said this was your place." James ignored her, his face flushing with anger. "This is absurd. I'm calling my lawyer." "You do that," Arnold agreed amiably. "In the meantime, I need to ask you both to vacate the property immediately. As of right now, you're trespassing on private property in violation of a legal restraining order." "Trespassing?" Vanessa's voice rose an octave. "James, you promised me. You said we were moving in here." Arnold raised an eyebrow. "Moving in?" "She didn't mean..." James began. "He said the place would be ours by summer," Vanessa interrupted, her carefully composed facade cracking. "He said his wife never used it anyway, and he was handling the Transfer of ownership. Arnold jotted something in his notebook. Is that right? And you are? Vanessa Cooper, she supplied, then immediately looked like she regretted it. Ms. Cooper, does Mrs. Mitchell know you were planning to move into her property? Vanessa's eyes widened. He told me they were separated. He said she had agreed to the divorce and property division months ago. I nearly dropped my phone, a shocked laugh escaping me. Even knowing about the affair, hearing her say it out loud, hearing how completely James had deceived this woman about our marriage, was stunning. On screen, James grabbed Vanessa's arm. That's enough. We're leaving. I think that's wise, Arnold agreed. But I should mention, Mr. Mitchell, that this incident will be documented and reported to the court. Violation of a restraining order is a serious offense. James's face was a storm of barely contained fury as he pulled Vanessa toward their car. She yanked her arm free, turning on him with tears streaming down her face. You lied to me, she shouted. You said you were practically divorced. You said this place was going to be our fresh start. Vanessa, not now, James hissed, glancing at Arnold, who was making no effort to give them privacy. You told me you'd handle everything, she continued, oblivious to their audience as months of false promises crumbled around her. I gave up my apartment last week because you said we'd be moving in here. That was a detail I hadn't known. James had convinced this woman to give up her home based on his fantasy of stealing mine. Whatever sympathy I might have felt for Vanessa as a fellow victim of James's deception evaporated. She'd been willing participant in destroying my marriage, eagerly planning to take my family property. I watched James practically shove Vanessa into the passenger seat before storming around to the driver's side. He paused to glare at Sheriff Reeves. This isn't over, he called out. Arnold tipped his hat. Drive safely now. Weather report says there's a storm coming. The metaphorical storm had already arrived, I thought, as I watched James's car peel away from my cottage. And he had driven straight into it. With no idea I had orchestrated every moment. I texted Rachel. Phase 1, complete. They just got kicked off the property by Sheriff Reeves. Her response came immediately. OMG. I wish I could have seen his face. What's next? Now we wait for his next move, I replied. But first, I'm heading back to Silver Cove. I think I'll enjoy that bottle of champagne they brought. By the time I arrived at the cottage an hour later, Sheriff Reeves was waiting on the porch. Quite a show you missed, he said, standing as I approached. I caught it on the security cameras, I admitted. Thank you, Arnold. He shook his head. Don't thank me for doing my job. That restraining order is legitimate, and so is the property. Deed. Your husband broke the law. He paused, his expression softening. Your grandparents would be proud of how you're handling this, Lisa. With dignity. With smarts. I blinked back unexpected tears. I just wanted to protect what's mine. And you did, he assured me. But this isn't over yet. Men like your husband, they don't take defeat gracefully. I'm counting on it, I said, unlocking the door with my new key. In fact, his next move is the most important part of my plan. Arnold raised an eyebrow. Do I want to know? I smiled. Probably not, but I promise it's all perfectly legal. After he left, I entered my cottage, breathing in the familiar scent of sea air and old wood. I retrieved the champagne James had brought, an expensive vintage, no doubt purchased with our joint funds, and poured myself a glass on the deck overlooking the moonlit water. My phone buzzed with incoming calls and texts from James, each more desperate and angry than the last. I silenced it and instead called Daniel. It's done, I told him when he answered. James violated the restraining order, attempted to access the property with his mistress, and she helpfully confirmed their plans to move in. Sheriff Reeves documented everything. Excellent, Daniel said. This strengthens our position considerably. Between the forgery, the restraining order violation, and the documented affair, We're in a very strong position for the divorce proceedings. What about the prenup? I asked. The infidelity clause is ironclad, he confirmed. When you signed it 12 years ago, James clearly never imagined he'd be the one violating it. The penalty is substantial, 30% of all marital assets to the wronged party, on top of the standard equal division. I savored a sip of champagne, enjoying the bitter sweetness. And have you frozen his access to the business accounts? As well? As of 5 o'clock today, Daniel confirmed. The judge was particularly moved by the evidence of financial misconduct. James won't be able to access any accounts beyond his personal checking until the hearing next week. Perfect, I said. I'm guessing he'll discover that tonight when his credit cards are declined at whatever hotel he's retreated to with Vanessa. Most likely, Daniel agreed. Lisa, I have to say, your composure throughout this process has been remarkable. Most clients in your position are understandably emotional. I watched the moonlight ripple across the water, feeling an unexpected sense of peace. Oh, I'm emotional, Daniel. But I've learned something important these past 2 weeks. Revenge works best when served with a clear head. After hanging up, I stretched out on the deck chair, savoring the night air and my perfectly orchestrated victory. James had tried to take everything from me, my marriage, my property, my dignity. Instead, he'd lost everything himself. And the most beautiful part? He'd done it to himself, through his own greed and arrogance. I'd simply created the conditions for his self-destruction. My phone buzzed again. A text from a number I didn't recognize. This is Vanessa. James told me nothing but lies. I'm so sorry. Can we talk? I stared at the message, considering my options. Engaging with her offered no strategic advantage. She was collateral damage in James's scheme, but she'd been a willing participant. Still, there was something satisfying about the possibility of learning just how deep James's deceptions went. Tomorrow. Harbor Point Cafe. 10 a.m., I replied. The final piece of my plan was about to fall into place, and it would be the most satisfying of all. Woordilar. The Resolution Harbor Point Cafe buzzed with the usual weekend morning crowd, locals catching up over coffee, tourists planning their beach day, and a handful of remote workers hunched over laptops. I arrived early, securing a corner, table with a view of both the entrance and the harbor beyond. Rachel sat beside me, having insisted on being present for the final showdown. Are you sure you want to do this? She asked, stirring her latte. You've already won. James is legally screwed, financially crippled, and publicly humiliated. Why meet with the mistress? I watched a sailboat drift across the harbor, its white sails bright against the blue water. Information, I said simply. James has been living a double life. I want to know just how elaborate the deception was. Rachel nodded slowly. And it has nothing to do with wanting to see the woman who almost moved into your family cottage. I didn't say that, I admitted with a small smile. But I'm not going to scream at her or throw coffee in her face, if that's what you're worried about. Damn, Rachel sighed dramatically. I was hoping for a scene. At precisely 10 a.m., Vanessa Cooper pushed through the cafe door. In person, without the filter of security camera footage, she looked younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s to my 41. Her confident posture couldn't quite hide the nervous tension in her shoulders as she scanned the room. I raised my hand, slightly, catching her attention. Recognition flickered across her face, presumably from seeing my photos around the cottage before they were removed, and she approached our table with visible trepidation. Lisa, she asked unnecessarily. Have a seat, Vanessa, I said, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. This is my friend Rachel. Vanessa slid into the chair, clutching her purse like a shield. Thank you for meeting me. I know this is uncomfortable. That's certainly one word for it, Rachel muttered. I shot her a warning glance before turning back to Vanessa. You said James told you nothing but lies. I'm curious what exactly he told you about me, about our marriage. Vanessa inhaled deeply, as if preparing for a plunge into cold water. He said you two had been separated for over a year, that you'd already agreed to divorce terms but were keeping up appearances for his business clients until after tax season. She paused, her cheeks flushing. He said you were seeing someone else too, a colleague at your marketing firm. I raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised. Creative. Continue. He told me you'd agreed to let him keep the beach house because you never used it and preferred the city. She glanced down at her hands. He said you'd already signed the transfer paperwork months ago, and we were just waiting for the final processing. And you believed all this without ever seeing any actual divorce documents? Rachel asked skeptically. Vanessa's flush deepened. He showed me papers, what I thought were divorce papers with your signature. Said the property transfer was part of the settlement. I exchanged glances with Rachel. James had apparently gone so far as to forge divorce documents, not just the deed transfer. When did your relationship begin? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Last June, she admitted. I'm a client advisor at Meridian. We worked on a few projects together and then… She trailed off. And then you started sleeping with a married man, Rachel finished for her. Vanessa flinched. I never would have if I'd known the truth. I don't do that. She looked directly at me for the first time. I swear I thought you two were already separated when we started seeing each other. I studied her, searching for deception and finding what appeared to be genuine distress. Did you give up your apartment because of his promises about the beach house? She nodded miserably. My lease was ending anyway, and he said it was perfect timing. Why keep paying rent when we'd be moving to Silver Cove within a few weeks? I put most of my stuff in storage. Where did you stay last night? I asked, curiosity getting the better of me. Hotel in Bridgeport, she said. The most basic room they had since I'm paying out of pocket now. She hesitated. James's credit cards were all declined. He completely freaked out, said you must have frozen the accounts illegally. Rachel snorted. Yeah, that tracks. Always someone else's fault. I left this morning while he was on the phone screaming at his bank, Vanessa continued. That's when I decided to text you. I needed to know the truth. I sipped my coffee, contemplating her story. It aligned with everything I'd discovered. James had constructed an elaborate fiction, likely believing he could forge the property transfer and present me with a fait accompli once the deed was processed. Here's the truth, Vanessa, I said finally. James and I were never separated. Until 2 weeks ago, I had no idea he was having an affair. We lived together, slept in the same bed, took vacations together. There was no divorce in progress, no agreement about property division, and certainly no other man in my life. She closed her eyes briefly, pain washing over her features. I feel so stupid. You were deceived, I acknowledged. Though I have to wonder why you never questioned why you never saw any evidence of this supposed separation. Why you never insisted on meeting me if we were supposedly so amicable about the divorce. I did ask, she said quietly. Multiple times. James always had excuses. You were traveling for work. You were dealing with family issues. You weren't emotionally ready to meet his new partner. She shook her head. I should have pushed harder, demanded proof. I wanted to believe him. People generally do believe what they want to believe, I agreed, surprising myself with the lack of bitterness in my voice. 2 weeks ago, I would have hated this woman with every fiber of my being. Now, seeing her humiliation and genuine shock, I felt an unexpected sense of kinship. We had both been manipulated by a man who viewed other people as pieces on a chessboard to be moved according to his whims. What will you do now? I asked. Vanessa shrugged helplessly. Find a new apartment. Look for another job. I can't keep working at Meridian after this. She hesitated. James mentioned last night that you're filing for divorce? The paperwork was submitted yesterday, I confirmed. Given the documented infidelity and attempted fraud, my attorney believes it will be relatively straightforward. She nodded, then reached into her purse and pulled out a small flash drive. You might want this for your case. It has emails, text screenshots, photos James sent me of the cottage, including some where he claimed he was renovating it for us. There are also voice messages where he discusses the property transfer. She placed it on the table between us. I saved everything because I was excited about our future together. Now I just want to help fix what I unintentionally helped break. I stared at the flash drive, not immediately reaching for it. This was unexpected. Actual evidence freely offered by the Mistress. It could potentially strengthen my already solid case against James. Why would you help me? I asked, genuinely curious. Vanessa met my gaze directly. Because what he did was wrong. To both of us. She swallowed hard. And because I need to be able to look at myself in the mirror again. I picked up the flash drive, turning it over in my fingers. Thank you, I said finally. This may be useful. There's something else you should know, she added, hesitation in her voice. James has been moving money around. He mentioned offshore contingencies a few times when discussing our future. I didn't think much of it then, but now. Rachel leaned forward, suddenly alert. You think he's been hiding assets? I don't know for certain, Vanessa admitted. But last month, he was very stressed about transferring some funds before the quarterly reporting period. Said something about getting things in place before any changes happened with your marriage. I exchanged glances with Rachel, then pulled out my phone to text Daniel. This was exactly the kind of information that could prevent James from hiding marital assets during the divorce. I should go, Vanessa said, standing abruptly. I've taken enough of your time. I looked up at her. This woman who had unknowingly become entangled in my husband's web of lies. Vanessa, I said, my voice softer than I'd intended. For what it's worth, I believe you didn't know. She gave a sad smile. Doesn't change what happened. But thank you. She hesitated. That cottage is beautiful. Your renovations were perfect, especially the kitchen tiles. With that, she turned and walked out of the cafe, her shoulders straightened as if shedding a burden. Rachel watched. Her go, then turned to me with raised eyebrows. Well, that was unexpected. You okay? I was surprised to find that I actually was. Yes, I said thoughtfully. I think I am. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. Just spoke to Judge Harmon. Emergency asset freeze approved based on suspicion of concealment. All accounts now locked pending forensic accounting. Will call. In 10 with details. I showed the message to Rachel, who whistled low. Game, set, match, she said. James is completely screwed. I nodded, a sense of finality washing over me. And I never had to confront him directly or sink to his level. He orchestrated his own downfall. With a little help from your strategic planning, Rachel added with a grin. With a little help, I agreed, smiling as I tucked the flash drive safely into my purse. Outside the cafe windows, the harbor sparkled in the late morning sun. Sailboats drifted peacefully across the water, their white sails billowing in the breeze. The sight filled me with a sense of possibility I hadn't felt in years. James had tried to take my family's legacy, the cottage that held generations of memories. Instead, he'd given me something unexpected. Freedom from a marriage that had been built on lies, and the opportunity to reclaim not just my property, but my future. My phone rang, Daniel calling with details about the asset freeze. As I answered, I stepped outside onto the harbor promenade, breathing in the salt air and feeling, for the first time in weeks, genuinely at peace. The real victory wasn't just keeping my beach house, it was discovering my own strength in the process. Part 5. The Aftermath. 6 months passed with the steady rhythm of waves against the Silver Cove shoreline. Summer faded into a brilliant new England autumn, painting the coastal forests in fiery hues that complemented the deepening blues of the Atlantic. I found myself spending more time at the cottage than I ever had before, working remotely 3 days a week, hosting weekend gatherings with friends, and simply sitting on the deck watching the ever-changing seascape. The divorce had been finalized. With remarkable speed, thanks to the mountain of evidence against James. The judge had been particularly unmoved by his attempts to claim ignorance about the forged documents or to paint me as the unreasonable party. Daniel had called it the most satisfying court proceeding of his career. He never stood a chance, Daniel had said afterward, packing up his briefcase with a pleased expression. The forensic accountant found the offshore accounts Vanessa had hinted at, 3 of them, holding nearly $2 million of marital assets he'd been siphoning away for years. Years? I'd asked, genuinely shocked. Not just since Vanessa? Daniel had shaken his head. The oldest transfers date back 4 years. Whatever he was planning, it predated his relationship with Ms. Cooper. That revelation had been oddly freeing. James's betrayal wasn't just about Vanessa or even the beach house. It was a fundamental character flaw, a dishonesty that had likely been present throughout our marriage. I hadn't failed at being a wife. I'd simply been married to someone incapable of true partnership. On this crisp October morning, I walked along the shoreline with Emma, my sister having driven up from Boston for the weekend. The tide was out, revealing a wide swath of wet sand perfect for our traditional beach walk and talk. "The place looks amazing," Emma commented, gesturing back toward the cottage. "Those new windows in the sunroom were worth every penny." Smiled, gratitude washing through me. "I couldn't have done any of this without your legal expertise. You saved my inheritance." Emma shrugged, but couldn't hide her pleased expression. "That's what sisters do. Besides, taking down a financial predator like James was professionally satisfying." We walked in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the rhythmic crash of waves providing a soothing backdrop. Gulls wheeled overhead, their cries occasionally piercing the constant ocean symphony. "Have you heard anything about him lately?" Emma finally asked. I bent to pick up a perfect scallop shell, brushing sand from its ridged surface. Rachel ran into a former colleague from Meridian last week. Apparently, James was quietly asked to resign after the divorce settlement made headlines in financial circles. No firm wants an advisor with a documented history of financial fraud. "Can't say I'm surprised," Emma nodded. "What about his girlfriend? Vanessa?" "Ex-girlfriend," I corrected. "She reached out about 3 months ago. She's working at a different firm now in Providence. Said she wanted to thank me for not naming her in any of the legal proceedings." Emma raised an eyebrow. That was surprisingly decent of her to reach out. I shrugged. She was another pawn in his game. Younger, impressionable, eager to believe the fantasy he was selling. I paused, watching a fishing boat on the horizon. The difference is, she got out before wasting 12 years. You didn't waste those. "Years, Lisa," Emma said firmly. "You built a successful career, made a beautiful home, cultivated friendships that supported you when everything fell apart. That's not wasted time." I smiled at my sister's fierce defense. "You're right. And now I have the cottage back to its former glory, plus a divorce settlement that ensures I'll never have to worry about finances again." The judge had not only awarded me the contested cottage, but also enforced the infidelity clause in our prenuptial agreement, giving me 30% of our marital assets on top of the standard equal division. With the discovery of James's hidden accounts, that 30% had been substantial. I'd paid off the mortgage on our, now my, primary residence in Oakwood Heights, renovated the cottage, and still had enough to establish a comfortable, investment portfolio. Speaking of finances, Emma said carefully, have you given any more thought to Daniel's offer? I felt a flutter of something between excitement and trepidation. Daniel Wilson, my divorce attorney, had recently approached me about joining his firm as a consultant. Not as a lawyer, I had no legal training, but as someone who could help clients navigate the emotional and financial landscapes of complicated divorces. I'm meeting with him next week to discuss details, I admitted. It's appealing in many ways: part-time, flexible hours, the chance to help others avoid the mistakes I made. You'd be perfect for it, Emma said with conviction. You're living proof that there's life after betrayal, and your organizational skills during your own divorce impressed everyone involved. We turned back toward the cottage, our footprints leaving a temporary record of our path along the wet sand. If you'd told me a year ago that James's affair would ultimately lead to a career change, a renovated cottage, and the healthiest bank account of my life, I would have called you delusional, I mused. Emma laughed. Life has a way of surprising us. Though, in this case, you engineered quite a few of those surprises yourself. As we approached the cottage, I paused to appreciate its weathered gray shingles and white trim against the backdrop of azure sky. My grandmother's wind chimes, the ones I'd carefully stored away during James and Vanessa's attempted break-in, hung from the porch eave, creating a delicate melody in the sea breeze. You know what I've been thinking about lately? I said, as we climbed the steps to the deck. How differently things might have turned out if I'd confronted James immediately after discovering the affair. Emma settled into one of the Adirondack chairs, wrapping her sweater more tightly around herself. Explosive argument, messy public scene, him having time to cover his tracks? Exactly, I nodded, taking the chair beside her. My first instinct was hurt and anger, to lash out, to demand explanations. But stepping back, gathering evidence, consulting experts like you and Daniel, that's what saved everything that mattered to me. Strategic patience, Emma agreed. Something James clearly lacked, I laughed. His impatience was his downfall. If he'd waited even one more week before trying to move Vanessa into the cottage, the restraining order notification would have reached him officially. Instead, he walked right into a legal trap of his own making, Emma finished with satisfaction. While wearing designer shoes that would later be listed as marital assets. We both laughed at that. The memory of the court-ordered inventory of James's extensive wardrobe had become something of a running joke between us. The afternoon stretched pleasantly before us, with plans for a seafood dinner at the local restaurant, and a movie night afterward. This easy rhythm, this peaceful existence, was something I'd been rediscovering in the months since the divorce. The simple joy of unstructured time spent with people who genuinely cared about me. My phone buzzed with a message, and I glanced at it casually, then sat up straighter as I registered the name on the screen. Everything okay? Emma asked, noticing my reaction. It's from Robert Fowler, I said, surprised. Robert was the CEO of a marketing agency that competed with Westview, my employer. We'd met at industry functions over the years, but had never worked together directly. What does he want? Emma asked, curiosity evident in her voice. I scanned the message quickly. He's offering me a job. Creative director position at Fowler Communications. Says he's been following my campaign work and... What? He says, I also admired how you handled your recent personal challenges with dignity and strategic thinking. Those are exactly the qualities our leadership team values. Emma grinned. Seems your divorce made an impression in professional circles, too. I shook my head, amazed. The salary he's offering is nearly double what I'm making at Westview. Between this and Daniel's consultant offer, you've got options, Emma observed. What are you thinking? I set the phone aside, turning to watch a pair of sailboats racing across the horizon. I'm thinking that 6 months ago I was desperately trying to hold on to what I had. Now I'm choosing between exciting new opportunities I never expected. The universe works in mysterious ways, Emma offered philosophically. Not that mysterious, I countered with a smile. James's betrayal forced me to fight for what was mine, to assert my worth. Maybe that energy radiates outward. Emma raised her coffee mug in a toast. To radiating worth. I clinked my mug against hers. And to beach houses that stay exactly where they belong. As the afternoon sun cast long golden shadows across the deck, I felt a profound sense of contentment. The cottage remained my sanctuary, now more truly mine than ever before. The career I'd built continued to flourish, with new paths opening before me. And most importantly, I'd discovered a resilience within myself that no betrayal could diminish. Later that evening, after Emma had gone to bed, I walked alone along the moonlit shore. The tide was coming in, waves rushing to reclaim the beach in their eternal cycle. I thought about cycles of my own life, how ending my marriage had felt. Like a catastrophic loss at first, but had ultimately created space for growth I hadn't imagined possible. My phone buzzed again in my pocket. A text from Rachel. Just drove past your old house in Oakwood? You'll never guess who I saw carrying boxes inside. I smiled, already suspecting the answer. James? Bingo. Downsizing to a rental after losing his job and most of his assets in the divorce. Karma's a beach house bitch. I laughed out loud, the sound carried away by the ocean breeze. The image of James moving boxes into a rental property while I stood on the private beach of my family cottage perfectly encapsulated how completely our fortunes had reversed. Speaking of beaches, Rachel continued, we're still on for the girls' weekend at Silver Cove next month, right? Emma confirmed she's coming. Absolutely, I replied. The guest rooms are ready and waiting. I tucked the phone away and continued my walk, feeling the cool sand between my toes. A year ago, I would have been devastated by the discovery of James's betrayal, might have believed that the end of my marriage meant the end of happiness. Instead, I'd found that losing what wasn't truly mine had cleared the path to reclaiming what was. The cottage lights glowed warmly in the distance, a beacon guiding me home. My home, secured by my own determination and strategic thinking. As I walked toward it, I felt a sense of completion, of circles closing and new ones beginning. James had once told a colleague that I was too trusting, too naive, to ever succeed on my own. He'd been wrong about that, just as he'd been wrong about his ability to take what wasn't his. The truth was, I'd always had everything I needed within me, the strength, the intelligence, the patience to protect what mattered. The beach house standing proudly against the night sky was more than just property I'd managed to keep. It was a symbol of resilience, of justice, of careful planning. Rewarded, its weathered shingles and salt-kissed windows had witnessed generations of my family's history, and now they would witness my renaissance as well. I had changed the ownership of more than just a deed. I had changed the ownership of my story. Morning dawned with the kind of perfect clarity that only seems to exist near the ocean. Sunlight sparkled across the water, creating a dazzling display that pulled me from sleep earlier than I'd planned. With Emma still asleep in the guest room, I made coffee and carried it to the deck, settling into what had become my favorite, morning ritual. The Silver Cove community was beginning to stir, a few dedicated joggers on the beach, a fisherman casting his line from the rocky point, a young couple walking hand in hand along the water's edge. I sipped my coffee and watched this peaceful scene unfold, still sometimes amazed that I'd nearly lost it all. My phone chimed with an email notification. Opening it, I found a message from Daniel with the subject line, Official Job Offer Consulting. Position. Attached was a formal proposal outlining the role he'd described, helping clients navigate divorce proceedings with a focus on asset protection and emotional well-being. The compensation was generous, The hours flexible enough to accommodate my marketing career if I chose to continue it. I was contemplating this when another email arrived, this one from Robert Fowler, following up on his text message with details about the creative director position. The opportunity was equally appealing. Leading a team, higher salary, the chance to shape campaigns from conception to execution. Two paths, both promising. A year ago, I'd been focused solely on maintaining what I had. Now I was contemplating which new direction to pursue. The irony wasn't lost on me. Emma emerged from the cottage, her own coffee mug in hand. "You're up early," she observed, joining me at the railing. "Just enjoying the view," I replied, and considering my options. "Any conclusions?" I shook my head. "Not yet, but I'm leaning toward Daniel's offer. There's something appealing about helping others protect what matters to them." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "You'd be good at it. You've lived it." "Exactly." I watched a sailboat tacking against the morning breeze. I keep thinking about how lost I felt when I first discovered James's betrayal. How I didn't know where to turn or what steps to take. Having someone guide me through that process made all the difference. "And now you could be that guide for others," Emma concluded. We fell into comfortable silence, the rhythmic sound of waves providing a soothing backdrop to our thoughts. After a while, Emma spoke again. "You know what I admire most about how you handled everything? You never let it turn you bitter." I considered this. I came close. Those first few days after finding the emails about Vanessa and the beach house, I was absolutely furious. But then I realized something important. "What's that?" Bitterness would have clouded my judgment. Strategic thinking required emotional clarity. I sipped my coffee. Besides, the best revenge wasn't making James suffer. It was making sure I thrived. Emma smiled. "And thriving you are." Later that morning, as Emma packed her car for the drive back to Boston, my phone rang with an unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something prompted me to answer. "Lisa Mitchell speaking." "Lisa, it's Vanessa Cooper." Her voice was hesitant, as if uncertain of her reception. "I hope it's okay that I called." I was surprised, but not displeased. "Of course. Is everything all right?" "Yes, actually. I wanted to let you know I'm moving to Chicago. I got a job offer with a financial firm there." "Congratulations," I said, genuinely meaning it. "That sounds like a fresh start." "It is," she agreed, relief evident in her voice. "But before I go, I wanted to thank you again. For how you handled everything. You could have made things so much worse for me, but you didn't." I thought about that day in Harbor Point Cafe, how I'd recognized in Vanessa another victim of James's manipulations. We both deserved better than what James offered. "We did," she said softly. "Anyway, I just wanted you to know I'm doing okay. And that meeting you that day changed how I think about, well, everything. You showed me what dignity looks like in the face of betrayal." After we said our goodbyes, I stood on the porch watching Emma's car disappear down the coastal road. The conversation with Vanessa had been unexpected, but somehow fitting. Another loose end neatly tied as all of us moved forward into new chapters. I turned back to the cottage, my cottage, taking in its weathered charm and solid presence. Inside were generations of memories. My grandparents playing cards at the kitchen table, my parents hosting summer barbecues, my own childhood explorations of tidal pools and hidden coves. James had nearly stolen this legacy with his forged documents and elaborate lies. Instead, his actions had inadvertently strengthened my connection to this place, to my family history, to myself. The cottage wasn't just a property I'd managed to keep in the divorce. It had become a symbol of resilience, of strategic patience, of the power that comes from protecting what truly matters. I walked inside and opened my laptop, ready to draft responses to both job offers. Whatever path I chose, I would approach it with the same clear-eyed determination that had served me so well during the past tumultuous year. James had once told me that I was too sentimental about the beach house, that I didn't understand its real value as an asset. He'd been wrong about that, just as he'd been wrong about so many things. The true value of Silver Cove wasn't measured in property assessments or market trends. Its worth lay in the sanctuary it provided, the continuity it represented, the peace it offered. As I settled at the dining table, sunlight streaming through windows that framed perfect ocean views, I felt a profound sense of rightness. The attempted theft of my property had ultimately given me something precious: the knowledge that I was stronger, smarter, and more strategic than anyone, including myself, had ever given me credit for. The beach house remained exactly where it belonged, and so did I. 3 years later, I stood on the deck of my Silver Cove cottage, watching a spectacular sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The ocean reflected these colors, creating the illusion that the whole world was ablaze with brilliant light. These moments, these perfect, peaceful moments, still took my breath away, even after making the cottage my primary residence 2 years ago. The decision to leave Oakwood Heights had come naturally after I accepted Daniel's consulting position. The flexible hours allowed me to work primarily from Silver Cove, traveling to the firm's offices in Bridgeport only for client meetings. My marketing skills hadn't gone to waste. I'd developed a specialty in helping clients rebrand their lives. After divorce, combining emotional support with practical guidance on everything from financial planning to social media presence. "Wine delivery," called a voice from behind me. I turned to see Rachel approaching with 2 glasses, her weekend bag slung over her shoulder. "Perfect timing," I smiled, accepting a glass. "Just in time for nature's show." Rachel settled into the chair beside mine, stretching her legs after the drive from the city. 3 years later, and I still can't believe this view is your everyday reality. Sometimes I can't either, I admitted, sipping the chilled white wine. "Have you heard the latest about James?" Rachel asked, her tone suggesting she had gossip to share. I shook my head. After the divorce, I'd deliberately disconnected from news about my ex-husband, focusing instead on building my new life. "He's filing for bankruptcy," Rachel said. "Apparently the financial fraud findings from our divorce case followed him, made it impossible for him to get hired at any reputable firm. He tried starting his own financial advisory business, but who's going to trust their money to someone with his reputation?" I absorbed this information without the satisfaction Rachel clearly expected me to feel. "That's unfortunate," I said finally. Rachel raised an eyebrow. "That's it? Unfortunate? The man tried to steal your family home, had a year-long affair, behind your back, and attempted to defraud you of millions in assets." I smiled, understanding her reaction. "I know, but his downfall was never my goal, Rachel. Protecting what was mine was. Everything that's happened to James since then has been the natural consequence of his own actions." Rachel considered this, then raised her glass. "To natural consequences, then." I clinked my glass against hers. "And to unexpected blessings." Later that evening, after Rachel had gone to bed in the guest room, I walked along the moonlit beach, a nightly ritual that had become sacred to me. The tide was coming in, waves creeping higher up the sand with each rhythmic surge. I thought about the unexpected trajectory my life had taken. The discovery of James's betrayal had been devastating in the moment, a seismic disruption to the life I thought I had. Yet from that painful revelation had come a cascade of positive changes I never would have initiated on my own. Moving permanently to Silver Cove, shifting careers to help others navigate their own life upheavals, rediscovering parts of myself that had been submerged during my marriage. My independence, my creativity, my capacity for strategic thinking and decisive action. James had tried to take my beach house, seeing it only as a valuable asset to be acquired and offered to his mistress. In his arrogance, he had underestimated both my attachment to my family legacy and my determination to protect it. That miscalculation had cost him everything: his marriage, his career, his reputation, and ultimately his financial stability. I, on the other hand, had gained far more than just the retention of my property. I had reclaimed my autonomy, discovered untapped strengths, and created a life more authentic and fulfilling than the one I'd been living before. The beach house stood as a symbol of that transformation, not just a building I'd managed to keep, but a testament to the power of strategic patience, clear thinking, and unwavering resolve. As I turned back toward the cottage, its windows glowing warmly against the night, I felt a deep sense of peace. The path that had led me here had been unexpected and at times painful, but it had brought me exactly where I needed to be. When my husband's mistress moved into our beach house, I had already changed the ownership, not just of the property, but of my entire life. And that made all the difference. I had chosen the professional path that felt most aligned with my newfound strength, accepting Daniel's offer to become a consultant at his firm. The decision to help others navigate their own divorce journeys had given me an unexpected sense of purpose. Each client who walked through the door reminded me of myself 3 years ago, confused, hurt, and desperately in need of strategic guidance. Providing that clarity had become deeply fulfilling work. 5 years to the day after James's attempted beach house theft, I hosted a small gathering at Silver Cove. The cottage had evolved over time, just as I had. The basic structure remained true to its heritage, but I'd made modifications that better suited my new life: a dedicated home office overlooking the water, an expanded deck for entertaining, and a small guest house where Emma could stay during her increasingly frequent visits from Boston. To Lisa, Daniel raised his glass, standing near the edge of the deck where the evening sun cast everyone in a golden glow. Who turned a personal crisis into a professional calling and has helped dozens of our clients protect what matters most to them. Rachel, Emma, and the handful of other close friends gathered around the table joined in the toast. I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the sunset, the genuine appreciation of people who had supported me through my darkest days and celebrated my brightest ones. After everyone had eaten their fill of the catered seafood dinner, the conversation flowed easily against the backdrop of waves gently breaking on the shore below. I found myself in a quiet moment with Daniel, who had moved from being merely my attorney to becoming a trusted friend and valued colleague. "I got an interesting call yesterday," he said, swirling the wine in his glass, "from Vanessa Cooper." I raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised. "Vanessa? I haven't heard that name in years." "She's back from Chicago," Daniel explained. "Apparently, she's established quite a successful career in financial compliance. The irony isn't lost on her." I smiled at this unexpected update. Good for her. What did she want? "She's written a book," he said, "about financial infidelity in relationships, warning signs, protective measures, recovery strategies. She wanted to know if you'd object to her including your case as an anonymous example." I considered this for a moment, watching the horizon where the setting sun was beginning to melt into the ocean. "I don't mind," I decided. "If it helps other women protect themselves, that seems worthwhile." Daniel nodded approvingly. "That's what I thought you'd say. I'll let her know." Later, as the gathering wound down and guests began to depart, Emma remained behind to help me clean up. We worked in comfortable synchronicity, sisters who had grown even closer through adversity. "I was thinking about Mom and Dad earlier," Emma said as she rinsed wine glasses. "Remember how they used to sit on this deck every evening during summer vacations, just watching the sunset, barely talking?" I smiled at the memory. I used to think they were bored. Now I understand they were just content. Emma nodded. "They would be so proud of how you've handled everything. Not just keeping the cottage, but what you've built from the ashes of that marriage." Sometimes I wonder if I should thank James, I mused, only half joking. Without his betrayal, I might never have discovered what I'm truly capable of. Emma gave me a sidelong glance. Have you heard anything about him recently? I shook my head. Not directly. Daniel mentioned he's trying to rebuild in Florida, working for some small investment company. Starting over at 50 can't be easy. Especially with his reputation, Emma added. We finished the dishes in thoughtful silence. Later, after Emma had gone to bed, I found myself drawn to the shore for my customary evening walk. The nearly full moon illuminated the beach in silvery light, creating a magical landscape of shadows and shimmering sand. As I walked, I reflected on the 5-year journey since discovering James's betrayal. The initial shock and pain had long since faded, replaced by a steady appreciation for the life I'd created in its aftermath. The consulting work with Daniel's firm had evolved into a specialty practice focused specifically on helping clients with complex property matters during divorce, a niche directly inspired by my own experience. My phone vibrated in my pocket. Normally, I wouldn't answer during my sacred beach walks, but something prompted me to check the screen. The number wasn't familiar. Hello? I answered, slightly wary. Lisa. The voice on the other end was instantly recognizable, despite the years since I'd heard it. It's James. I stopped walking, momentarily frozen by the unexpected contact. James, I acknowledged, keeping my voice neutral. This is a surprise. I know, he said, a note of hesitation in his voice I'd never heard during our marriage. I wouldn't have called, but I'm back in Silver Cove for a few days. Business trip. I drove past the cottage earlier and saw the lights on, the gathering on the deck. I remained silent, unsure where this was heading. You've done well. With the place, he continued when I didn't respond. The expansion looks good. What do you want, James? I asked directly, unwilling to engage in small talk with the man who had tried to steal my family legacy. He sighed. I'm not entirely sure. Closure, maybe? It's been 5 years. We had closure, I reminded him. It was called a divorce decree. That was legal closure, he countered. I'm talking about something more personal. I've been doing a lot of reflecting lately. I resumed walking, the phone pressed to my ear. And what has this reflection revealed? That I made the biggest mistake of my life, he said simply. Not just the affair with Vanessa, but everything that followed. The attempt to take the cottage, the forged documents, the hidden accounts. I destroyed something good for... What? A fantasy that fell apart the moment reality intruded. I absorbed his words, surprised by their apparent sincerity. The James. I had known would never have admitted such failure. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because I'm remarrying next month, he said. And I don't want to bring any unresolved baggage into this relationship. My therapist suggested I make amends where possible. I almost laughed at the predictability of it. Of course, James would frame his apology in terms of what was beneficial for him and his new relationship. Some things never changed. Well, consider your amends made, I said, more amused than bitter. I wish you well in your new marriage, James. I hope you've learned enough to treat her better than you treated me. I have, he said quietly. And Lisa, for what it's worth, I really am sorry. You deserved better. After we hung up, I continued my walk along the moonlit shore, feeling strangely unburdened. The call from James hadn't reopened old wounds as I might have feared. Instead, it had. Confirmed how completely I had moved beyond that chapter of my life. The cottage glowed warmly in the distance, its lights a beacon guiding me home. My home, secured by my own determination. As I approached, I could see the silhouettes of Emma and Rachel on the deck, likely enjoying a nightcap and conversation. These were the relationships that mattered now. Honest, supportive connections with people who valued me for exactly who I was. James's call had been an unexpected bookend to a story I'd already finished reading. Whatever new life he was building in Florida had nothing to do with mine here in Silver Cove. His apology, while appreciated on some level, was unnecessary for my happiness or peace of mind. I had changed the ownership of my life long before he had thought to apologize for trying to take it. The 10th anniversary of my divorce arrived on a perfect June day, sunshine spilling across the Atlantic like scattered diamonds. I hadn't planned to mark the occasion. The date held little significance in my daily life now, but I found myself thinking about it as I prepared for the day ahead. 10 years since the legal severing of my marriage to James. 10 years of rebuilding, rediscovering, and ultimately thriving in ways I couldn't have imagined during those dark days of betrayal and legal battles. The consulting practice I'd started with Daniel had evolved into a full-fledged division of the firm, with 3 additional staff members and a reputation that brought clients from across New England. We specialized in high-asset property disputes, with a particular focus on helping clients protect inherited properties and family legacies. My personal experience had become professional expertise, and the satisfaction of guiding others through similar challenges never diminished. I poured my morning coffee and carried it out to the deck, a ritual unchanged despite the passing years. The Silver Cove cottage had continued to evolve, each modification making it more perfectly suited to my life. The latest addition, a glass-walled sunroom that allowed me to enjoy the ocean views even during the harshest winter storms, had been completed just months ago. My phone chimed with a calendar alert, reminding me of my first appointment of the day. A video consultation with a new client facing circumstances eerily similar to my own decade earlier. The synchronicity didn't escape me as I prepared for the call in my home office, the ocean visible through windows designed specifically for that purpose. The woman's face appeared on my screen precisely at the scheduled time, her expression a familiar mixture of anxiety and determination. "Ms. Mitchell, I'm Catherine Delaney. Thank you for making time to speak with me." "Please call me Lisa," I said warmly. "And making time is precisely what I'm here for, Catherine. Why don't you tell me what's brought you to our firm?" She took a deep breath. "My husband of 15 years has been having an affair with a colleague. I discovered it accidentally 3 weeks ago, but instead of confronting him immediately, I've been gathering information." She paused. "What I've found suggests he's been planning to transfer ownership of our lake house, property that came from my family, to put it beyond my reach before asking for a divorce. The parallels to my own story were striking. You've already shown wisdom by gathering information before confronting him," I told her. "Can you tell me more about the lake house? How long has it been in your family? Is the deed solely in your name or jointly held?" As Catherine detailed her situation, I made notes and asked strategic questions, guiding her toward the critical information we would need. By the end of our hour-long consultation, she had a preliminary action plan and a follow-up appointment, scheduled with Daniel for formal legal representation. "One last thing," I said as our call was concluding. "I want you to know that while this is undoubtedly one of the most challenging periods you'll face, it's not the end of your story. It's a difficult chapter, but there are better ones ahead." Catherine's expression softened slightly. "Daniel mentioned that you had personal experience with this type of situation. Is that true?" I nodded. "In fact, today marks exactly 10 years since my divorce was finalized after my ex-husband attempted something very similar with my family's beach cottage, this very house I'm speaking to you from now." "And you didn't lose it," she said, a hint of hope entering her voice. "I didn't lose it," I confirmed. "And you won't lose your lake house, Catherine. We'll make sure of it." After the call ended, I found myself reflecting on the strange circularity of life, how my personal tragedy had transformed into professional purpose, allowing me to help others navigate similar waters. Catherine would emerge stronger from her ordeal, just as I had from mine. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Happy Liberation Day. Dinner tonight to celebrate a decade of freedom?" I smiled at her message. Rachel had been marking this anniversary for years, even when I'd forgotten about it myself. "Sounds perfect," I replied. "Silver Cove at 7? "I'll bring the champagne," she responded. "The good stuff. 10 years deserves Veuve Clicquot." I set my phone down, turning my attention to the stack of client files requiring review before my next appointment. The work had become deeply satisfying, not just the legal and financial aspects, but the human element of guiding people through their darkest moments toward a brighter future. Later that afternoon, as I wrapped up my final consultation of the site day, an email notification appeared in the corner of my screen. The sender's name caught my attention immediately. Vanessa Cooper. The subject line read simply, "Thank you." Curious, I opened it after ending my client call. "Dear Lisa, I hope this email finds you well. Daniel Wilson mentioned he had spoken to you about my book project, and I wanted to thank you personally for permitting me to include your case, anonymously of course, as an example of both financial infidelity and strategic recovery. The Hidden Betrayal: Identifying and Surviving Financial Infidelity will be published next month, and while finalizing the manuscript, I found myself reflecting on our brief but significant interaction 5 years ago. Your composure and strategic thinking during what must have been an incredibly painful time made a lasting impression on me. I've enclosed an advanced digital copy of the book. Your story appears in Chapter 7, Property and Heritage, When the Betrayal Targets Family Legacy. I hope I've done justice to the complexity of your experience while maintaining your privacy. On a personal note, I want you to know that our meeting at Harbor Point Cafe changed the trajectory of my life. The dignity with which you handled that situation inspired me to rebuild my professional life, with a focus on helping others avoid similar situations. The financial compliance work I do now specializes in protecting vulnerable individuals from exploitation within relationships. If you're ever in Chicago, I'd be honored to buy you coffee. With respect and gratitude, Vanessa Cooper. I sat back in my chair, absorbing this unexpected communication. The thought of my experience helping others beyond my direct clients through Vanessa's book was strangely satisfying. The affair that had nearly destroyed my life had ultimately created ripples of positive change extending far beyond my own circumstances. I downloaded the attached manuscript and turned to Chapter 7, finding my story sensitively rendered with all identifying details altered. Vanessa had captured the essence of the betrayal and my strategic response without sensationalizing the emotional aspects or demonizing James. It was thoughtfully done, educational rather than exploitative. I composed a brief reply. Vanessa, thank you for sharing the manuscript. You've handled the case study with care and insight, and I'm pleased to have it included if it helps others protect themselves from similar situations. I'm glad to hear you found meaningful work in Chicago. The way we respond to life's challenges defines us more than the challenges themselves, something I suspect we've both discovered over the years. If I find myself in Chicago, I'll take you up on that coffee. Best wishes, Lisa Mitchell. As I sent the email, I marveled at life's unexpected connections. Vanessa, once the unwitting instrument of James's betrayal, had become an unlikely ally in helping others avoid similar pain. There was a certain poetic justice in that transformation. The doorbell rang, announcing Rachel's arrival earlier than expected. I found her on the porch, clutching not only the promised champagne, but also a small gift bag. "I know dinner's not until 7, she said, breezing past me into the cottage. "But I couldn't wait to give you this." I accepted the bag, following her into the kitchen where she immediately began searching for champagne flutes. "Open it," she urged, her excitement palpable. Inside the bag was a small velvet box. Opening it revealed a silver pendant in the shape of a beach cottage, exquisitely detailed right down to the distinctive roofline of Silver Cove. "Rachel," I breathed, lifting it from the box. "It's beautiful." Custom designed, she said proudly. I worked with a jeweler in Providence, showed her photos of the actual cottage. Look at the back. I turned the pendant over to find an inscription. Ownership reclaimed with the date of my divorce underneath. I know you don't dwell on the past, Rachel said, uncorking the champagne. But I wanted you to have something that commemorates not just what you kept, but what you built afterward. Emotion welled unexpectedly as I clasped the necklace around my neck. It's perfect. Thank you. We carried our champagne out to the deck, settling into the comfortable chairs that had witnessed countless conversations over the years. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in soft oranges and pinks. 10 years, Rachel mused, raising her glass. If someone had told you then what your life would look like now, would you have believed them? I considered the question seriously. Probably not. I was so focused on not losing what I had that I couldn't imagine gaining something better. I gestured toward the expanded cottage, the professional accomplishments, the deep peace I'd found. All of this came from being forced to fight for what mattered. To fighting for what matters, Rachel toasted. As we clinked glasses, I touched the silver cottage pendant resting against my collarbone. It represented not just the property I'd protected, but the life I'd reclaimed, a life more authentic and fulfilling than the one that had been threatened. The beach house remained where it belonged. And so did I. Exactly where I was meant to be. 15 years after James's attempted beach house theft, Silver Cove had transformed into more than just my home. It had become a gathering place for friends, a retreat for women navigating their own divorce journeys, and occasionally, a venue for celebrating new beginnings. Today, it was serving that last purpose. The cottage grounds were decorated with white chairs and floral arrangements, an arbor positioned perfectly to frame the ocean view. Emma, at 52, was finally getting married to Daniel Wilson, a development that had surprised everyone except perhaps Rachel, who claimed she'd seen the attraction brewing for years during our case strategy sessions. I adjusted the pale, blue dress I'd chosen for my maid of honor role, enjoying a moment of quiet in my bedroom before the ceremony began. Through the window, I could see guests arriving, being seated by Daniel's teenage nephew, who had enthusiastically taken on the usher's role. A light knock at the door preceded Emma's entrance, radiant in a simple cream-colored dress that complemented her still dark hair, now elegantly styled with subtle silver threads catching the light. "How are you feeling?" I asked, embracing her carefully to avoid wrinkling her outfit. "Peaceful," she replied with a smile. "No jitters, no doubts, just certainty that this is exactly right." I studied my sister, noting the relaxed happiness in her expression. "It suits you, this certainty. I'm so happy for both of you." "Who would have thought," Emma mused, adjusting a strand of her hair, "that your divorce would ultimately lead to my marriage? Life takes the strangest paths." "Indeed it does," I agreed. The relationship between Emma and Daniel had developed gradually over the years following my divorce case. What began as professional collaboration evolved into friendship, then eventually blossomed into something deeper. They had taken their time, dating for 3 years before Daniel proposed on a sailing trip last summer. "Is everything ready downstairs?" Emma asked, a hint of practical concern breaking through her serene demeanor. "Absolutely," I assured her. "Rachel has everything under control. The caterers are set up, the musicians are in place, and the weather is cooperating beautifully. All we need is the bride." Emma took a deep breath, then squeezed my hand. "Then let's not keep them waiting." The ceremony was everything Emma and Daniel had wanted. Simple, meaningful, overlooking the ocean that had become significant to both of them. I stood beside my sister, holding her bouquet as they exchanged vows, my heart full with happiness for two people who truly deserved each other. During the reception that followed, I found myself momentarily alone, watching the celebration from a quiet corner of the deck. Daniel and Emma were dancing, their faces alight with joy. Rachel was engaged in animated conversation with Daniel's brother and sister-in-law. The lawn was filled with friends and colleagues, everyone enjoying the perfect late September weather. "Beautiful ceremony," came a voice beside me. I turned to find Catherine Delaney, my client from 5 years ago, who had successfully protected her family's lake house from her ex-husband's schemes. "Catherine," I greeted her warmly, "I'm so glad you could make it." "I wouldn't have missed it," she said, gesturing toward Emma and Daniel, "especially after everything your sister and Daniel did to help me keep Pine Lake in the family." Catherine had become more than just a client over the years. After her divorce was finalized, she had trained as a financial counselor specializing in women's financial independence, occasionally referring clients to our firm when they needed legal representation. "How's the lake house?" I asked. She smiled. "Better than ever. I finally built that sunroom we talked about, the one similar to yours. It's changed everything about the winter experience there." "You'll have to send pictures," I said. I love seeing how people make these special properties truly their own after protecting them. Catherine nodded, her expression turning reflective. "You know, when we first spoke 10 years ago, you told me that what I was going through wasn't the end of my story, just a difficult chapter. You were right. The chapters that followed have been so much better than I could have imagined." Her words echoed my own journey so precisely that I felt a surge of emotion. "That's what makes this work meaningful," I told her. "Seeing people not just survive betrayal, but thrive beyond it." As Catherine moved away to join other guests, I found myself contemplating the strange interconnectedness of our lives, how my personal crisis had created a professional path that allowed me to help others like Catherine, who in turn was now helping women establish financial independence. The cottage that James had tried to take from me had become the centerpiece of a life I could never have envisioned during my marriage. Not just a home, but a symbol of resilience and new beginnings. For me, for Emma and Daniel, and in some ways, for every client whose case I had touched over the years. Rachel appeared at my side, offering a glass of champagne. "You've got that philosophical look again," she observed. "Penny for your thoughts?" I accepted the glass with a smile. "Just reflecting on how life's worst moments sometimes lead to its best chapters." "Amen to that," she agreed, clinking her glass against mine. "Though I have to say, watching you build this life over the past 15 years has been nothing short of inspirational. You didn't just survive, Lisa. You redefined the entire game." As the evening progressed, I found myself drawn to the shoreline, slipping away from the reception for a moment of quiet reflection. The setting sun cast long golden shadows across the sand, the endless rhythm of waves providing a soothing counterpoint to the celebration's joyful noise. I thought about ownership, not just of property, but of one's life and story. 15 years ago, James had attempted to take my beach house, seeing it merely as an asset to be transferred, a gift for his mistress. In doing so, he had inadvertently given me something far more valuable: the opportunity to reclaim not just my property, but my autonomy, my purpose, my future. The Silver Cove cottage stood proudly behind me, windows glowing warmly against the deepening twilight. Music and laughter drifted down from the reception, a testament to the joy that now filled a place once threatened by betrayal and loss. I had changed the ownership of more than just a deed. I had changed the ownership of my entire life story, from victim to victor, from betrayed wife to respected professional, from someone fighting not to lose to someone helping others win. And that, perhaps, was the sweetest victory of all. "There, you are," called Emma's voice from the path leading down to the beach. She had changed from her wedding dress into a more comfortable outfit for the reception's later hours. "I've been looking everywhere for you." I turned to greet my sister, now radiant with happiness. Just needed a moment of quiet. It's been quite a day. Emma nodded, understanding as always. It has. Perfect, though. She glanced back at the cottage. I keep thinking about how different everything might have been if James had succeeded in taking this place from you. A whole constellation of lives would be different, I agreed. My career, path, your relationship with Daniel, Catherine's lake house, and who knows how many other people we've helped over the years. Emma linked her arm through mine as we began walking back toward the celebration. He never understood what this place really meant, did he? To him, it was just prime real estate with a good view. No, he never did, I said softly. But his attempt to take it forced me to articulate exactly why it mattered. To myself, to the courts, to everyone. In trying to steal my inheritance, he inadvertently helped me claim a much greater legacy. As we rejoined the reception, Daniel appeared, offering his hand to Emma. May I have another dance with my wife? The word wife brought a fresh smile to Emma's face as she accepted his hand. I watched them move to the small dance floor, surrounded by well-wishers and friends, the cottage providing the perfect backdrop for this new chapter in their lives. Rachel appeared at my side, observing the scene with satisfaction. You know, she said thoughtfully, when my cousin lost her house in her divorce 20 years ago, I remember thinking how unfair the world was to women who built lives only to have them taken away. I nodded, remembering how vulnerable I had felt in those early days after discovering James's betrayal. But watching you, Rachel continued, watching how you fought strategically instead of just emotionally, how you outmaneuvered James at every turn. It changed my perspective on what's possible. You didn't just keep your beach house, Lisa. You showed all of us how to protect what matters most. I felt the weight of her words, the unexpected legacy of my private battle. What had begun as a desperate effort to keep my family property had evolved into something much larger, a template for others facing similar betrayals, a career helping people protect their own legacies, and now a gathering place for this joyful celebration of new beginnings. The Silver Cove cottage glowed in the twilight, sturdy and welcoming as it had been for generations of my family. But now it represented something beyond heritage or property value. It stood as a testament to resilience, to strategic thinking, to the power of protecting what truly matters. When my husband's mistress had almost moved into our beach house, I had already changed the ownership. Not just legally, but in the deepest sense of claiming what was rightfully mine, my property, my future, my story. And in that ownership, I had found not just security, but profound freedom. 20 years had passed since that pivotal moment when I discovered James's betrayal. The milestone wasn't something I deliberately commemorated, but the significance of it struck me one morning as I sipped coffee on my deck, watching the sunrise paint the sky in brilliant hues of pink and gold. 2 decades of reclaimed life. 20 years of growth that would never have happened if James had succeeded in his scheme. Silver Cove had weathered those years beautifully, much like I had. The cottage had been expanded again 5 years earlier. This time with a small annex that served as a retreat space for the women's empowerment workshops I'd begun hosting. What had started as informal gatherings of divorce clients seeking emotional support beyond legal advice had evolved into structured weekend programs combining financial education, legal awareness, and psychological healing. Morning, called. A voice from the kitchen doorway. Catherine Delaney, now my business partner in these ventures, emerged with her own coffee mug. You're up early. Just realized something, I replied as she joined me. It's been exactly 20 years since I found those emails about James and Vanessa. Catherine settled into the adjacent chair, tucking her legs beneath her. At 63, she maintained the energetic presence that had made her such an effective advocate for women's financial independence. 20 years, she mused. Hard to believe. I was thinking about how differently things might have turned out, I said, watching a fishing boat on the horizon. If I'd confronted James immediately, if I hadn't consulted Emma about the legal implications, if I hadn't changed the locks before they arrived that weekend? Catherine nodded thoughtfully. One impulsive decision could have changed everything. Instead, I continued, that single strategic choice to wait and gather evidence before acting set the pattern for the next 20 years of my life. We sat in comfortable silence, contemplating the strange ways life's trajectories could pivot on seemingly small decisions. Our weekend workshop was set to begin in a few hours. 15 women from across New England arriving for Reclaiming Your Future After Betrayal, the program Catherine and I had refined over years of collaboration. "Do you ever hear from him anymore?" Catherine asked. "James?" I shook my head. "Not since that one phone call 15 years ago. He remarried, moved to Arizona eventually. Emma mentioned once that she'd heard he'd retired from the financial sector entirely, working as a golf instructor at some resort community." "Quite the fall from his ambitions," Catherine observed. "I don't think of it as a fall," I mused. "More like finding his appropriate level. He wasn't cut out for the trust required in financial advisory, too tempted by shortcuts by taking what wasn't his." My phone chimed with a message from Rachel. "On my way with the workshop materials. Emma and Daniel sending regrets. Something about their son's soccer tournament. See you in an hour." Rachel, still my closest friend after all these years, had become an integral part of our workshops, bringing her background in marketing to help women rebrand themselves professionally after divorce. Her insights on digital presence and networking had proven invaluable to countless participants. "We should get ready," I told Catherine, rising from my chair. "The caterers will be here soon." As we moved through the cottage, preparing for the day ahead, I found myself reflecting on how the space had evolved. What had once been simply a family vacation home had transformed into a place of healing and empowerment for dozens of women each year. The irony wasn't lost on me. James's attempt to steal this property for his mistress had ultimately created a sanctuary for women recovering from similar betrayals. By mid-morning, the cottage was buzzing with activity. The first workshop participants had arrived, settling into the annex where chairs had been arranged in a circle. Rachel was organizing name tags and welcome packets, while Catherine guided women through the registration process. I stepped onto the deck for a moment of quiet before the session began, centering myself for the work ahead. These weekends were emotionally demanding but deeply fulfilling, watching women move from devastation to determination, from feeling victimized to becoming strategists in their own lives. "Lisa," one of the participants approached hesitantly. "I just wanted to thank you before we start. Your book changed my life." 5 years earlier, I had finally written Strategic Patience, Protecting What Matters When Everything Is at Stake, combining my personal story with practical guidance gleaned from 2 decades of consulting work. The book had found an unexpected audience beyond divorce situations. People facing business betrayals, family estate conflicts, and other complex interpersonal challenges had found value in its message of strategic rather than emotional response. "I'm so glad it helped," I told the woman. "What's your name?" "Melissa," she replied. "I brought my copy, hoping you might sign it later." "Of course," I agreed. "But more importantly, I hope this weekend gives you practical tools beyond what's in the book." She nodded earnestly. "That's why I'm here. I need to figure out how to protect my children's future without getting caught in a destructive legal battle with my ex." This was the heart of our work, helping women find the strategic path through emotional devastation. As I guided Melissa back inside to join the others, I felt the familiar sense of purpose that had defined this chapter of my life. The morning session focused on financial documentation, what to gather, how to recognize signs of hidden assets, when to involve forensic accountants, Catherine led this portion with the expertise of someone who had both lived through financial betrayal and spent years helping others navigate it. The most important thing to remember, she emphasized to the group, is that emotion is the enemy of strategy. The more upset you feel, the more you need to slow down and think carefully about each move. I watched the women taking notes, some nodding with recognition, others looking slightly overwhelmed. Every face in that circle represented a unique story of betrayal and resilience, each woman at a different point in her journey toward reclaiming her future. During the lunch break, I found myself drawn once again to the shoreline, needing a moment to recharge. The rhythmic sound of waves had been my constant companion through 20 years of rebuilding, a reminder that persistence often accomplished what force could not. Mind if I join you? Rachel appeared beside me, kicking off her shoes to walk barefoot in the sand. Always welcome, I assured her, linking arms as we strolled along the water's edge. 20 years, she mused, echoing my earlier reflection. Remember how you sat right here and told me you weren't going to confront James immediately, that you were going to play the long game? I smiled at the memory. I had no idea what that would actually mean. I was just trying to keep the cottage. And now look at all this. Rachel gestured back toward the property where women were gathered on the deck, sharing stories and support. You didn't just keep a house, Lisa. You built a movement. The afternoon session focused on legal strategies, conducted via video conference with Emma, who, despite missing the in-person workshop, had made time to share her expertise. At 61, my sister had built a reputation as one of New England's foremost experts in property rights during divorce, her practice thriving alongside her happy marriage to Daniel. The mistake many women make, Emma told the group from the screen, is assuming that emotional appeals will sway legal outcomes. They won't. Documents, evidence, and strategic timing are what win cases. I watched the participants absorbing Emma's wisdom, remembering how her clear-eyed guidance had been my lifeline during those first confusing days after discovering James's betrayal. Her legal expertise had saved my property, but her sisterly support had saved something much more precious, my belief that justice was possible. As Emma concluded her presentation, one participant raised her hand. This is probably a strange question, but do you ever feel grateful to your ex for what happened? Not for the betrayal itself, but for how it forced you to become stronger. The question hung in the air for a moment. I considered it seriously, aware that my answer mattered to these women still raw with hurt. Not grateful, no, I said finally. I don't give him credit for my growth. But I am grateful for my own response to what happened, for discovering strengths I might never have known I possessed otherwise. The woman nodded, seeming to find something valuable in this distinction. The beach house was always mine, I continued. But until it was threatened, I didn't fully appreciate its significance or potential. Sometimes we don't truly claim ownership of what matters until someone tries to take it away. As the formal session ended and the group broke for dinner preparations, I checked my email and found a message that caught me by surprise. The sender was Vanessa Cooper, with whom I'd maintained occasional cordial contact over the years. Dear Lisa, I hope this finds you well. I wanted to let you know that my second book, Beyond Betrayal, Building Ethical Financial Partnerships, is being released next month. The publisher has asked me to do a small speaking tour, and one of the proposed venues is the Silver Harbor Library, just a few miles from Silver Cove. Given our history and the sensitivity of the location, I wanted to check with you before confirming. The last thing I would want is to cause you any discomfort in your community. The event would be in late October. On a personal note, your workshops have been recommended to several of my clients. While I focus on the financial education aspect, many need the holistic approach you and Catherine have developed. I've been sending them your way, and the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. Wishing you continued success, Vanessa. 20 years ago, this message would have seemed impossible. The idea that James's mistress would be seeking my blessing to speak in my community, that we would have developed a professional respect that transcended our painful beginning. Yet here it was, another unexpected outcome of what had once seemed like only tragedy. I composed a thoughtful reply. Vanessa, thank you for your consideration in checking with me. I have no objection to your speaking engagement at Silver Harbor. In fact, I'd be happy to attend and perhaps bring some of our workshop participants if the timing aligns with one of our sessions. Your referrals have indeed found their way to us, and we appreciate the trust that represents. While we approach the healing journey from different angles, the goal is the same, empowering women to reclaim their futures after betrayal. Perhaps we could meet for coffee while you're in the area. 20 years seems like a significant enough milestone to warrant a conversation about how far we've both come since those difficult days. Best regards, Lisa. As I sent the email, I marveled at life's capacity for transformation. The beach house that James had tried to give to Vanessa had become my permanent home, and the center of work that now indirectly supported Vanessa's clients. The betrayal that had connected us had ultimately led both of us toward purposes neither could have imagined. The evening's workshop activities wrapped up with a bonfire on the beach, women sharing stories around the crackling flames as stars appeared in the darkening sky. These informal sessions often proved the most powerful, the moment when intellectual understanding of strategy transformed into emotional acceptance of a new path forward. I sat slightly apart, watching Catherine guide the conversation with her gentle expertise. At 72, I still found profound fulfillment in these gatherings, but had gradually shifted more leadership to Catherine and other women who had come through our program and returned as facilitators. Rachel settled beside me on the sand, wrapping a blanket around both our shoulders against the evening chill. Penny, for your thoughts? Just appreciating the view, I said, gesturing toward the circle of women illuminated by firelight. 20 years ago, I was fighting to keep this place as my sanctuary. I never imagined it would become sanctuary for so many others. Rachel nudged my shoulder affectionately. That's always been your gift, Lisa. You don't just survive. You create meaning from the experience, then share it with others. As the women's voices rose and fell with the rhythm of shared stories and supportive responses, I felt the familiar sense of rightness that had guided my path since those first strategic decisions 2 decades earlier. The beach house remained exactly where it belonged, not just physically on this stretch of Silver Cove shoreline, but philosophically at the center of work that mattered deeply. James had seen the property as merely an asset to be transferred, a gift to impress his mistress. He had never understood its true value lay not in its market price, but in its potential as a place of healing and transformation. In trying to take my beach house, he had inadvertently helped me discover its highest purpose, and my own. The weekend workshop concluded Sunday afternoon with a closing circle on the deck, each woman sharing her most significant insight and next steps. The transformations were already visible in many faces. A straightened posture here, a more determined expression there, the subtle shifts that signaled a woman reclaiming her power. Before we close, I said, addressing the group, I want to share something I've learned over 20 years of this work. The most powerful form of justice isn't revenge. It's rebuilding a life so magnificent that the betrayal becomes merely a footnote in your story rather than its defining chapter. The women nodded, some blinking back tears, others smiling with newfound resolve. As they gathered their belongings and prepared to depart, many approached for a final word or hug, expressions of gratitude that never failed to move me. After the last participant had left, Catherine, Rachel, and I collapsed onto the deck chairs, emotionally drained but satisfied. With the weekend's outcomes. Same time next month? Catherine asked, checking her calendar. I nodded. Though I might need to adjust things slightly. Vanessa Cooper will be speaking at Silver Harbor around then. I thought it might be valuable for some of our participants to hear her financial perspective. Rachel raised an eyebrow. 20 years later, and you two are doing professional collaboration? If that isn't the definition of moving beyond betrayal, I don't know what is. It's not collaboration exactly, I clarified. More like parallel journeys that occasionally intersect. I paused, considering. Though I did invite her for coffee. Catherine and Rachel exchanged surprised glances. What? I laughed. 20 years is a long time. We're different people now. Besides, I'm curious about her perspective after all this time. The woman who almost moved into your beach house, Rachel mused. Coming for coffee at said beach house decades later. There's a certain poetic justice to it. As Catherine and Rachel departed, I found myself alone in the cottage that had been the center of so much drama, and ultimately so much healing. I walked through the rooms slowly, appreciating how each space had evolved while maintaining the essential character that had made it special to generations of my family. The kitchen where my grandmother had taught me to bake now hosted cooking therapy sessions for women reclaiming joy in everyday activities. The living room where my parents had entertained summer guests had become a space for women to learn about financial independence. The sunroom I'd added now served as a meditation space for quiet reflection. Every modification, every expansion had honored the cottage's heritage while allowing it to serve its new purpose. Much like my own life's evolution, the changes had been both respectful of the past and responsive to present needs. My phone chimed with a response from Vanessa. Lisa, coffee sounds perfect. And yes, 20 years feels like an appropriate milestone to acknowledge how far we've both come. I'll be in Silver Harbor October 23rd, 25. Perhaps the morning of the 24th would work? I've followed your work from afar and have tremendous respect for what you've built. In an odd way, I feel we've been walking parallel paths all these years. Both, helping women recover from situations similar to the one we found ourselves in, albeit from different angles. See you in October, Vanessa. I confirmed the date, then stepped out onto the deck as twilight settled over the cove. The first stars were appearing in the darkening sky, reflecting on the calm water below. In the distance, lights from other cottages created a gentle borderline between land and sea. 20 years ago, I had stood in this same spot, devastated by betrayal and determined to keep what was rightfully mine. I couldn't have imagined then how completely that single battle would reshape my entire life's purpose, creating ripples that would touch hundreds of other women's lives. James had tried to take my beach house, seeing it only as a valuable asset. In doing so, he had inadvertently set me on a path to discovering its true worth, not as property to be possessed, but as a sanctuary where transformation could occur. The ownership I had fought so hard to maintain had evolved into something far more significant than a deed filed at the county clerk's office. I had claimed ownership not just of a physical space, but of my entire life story, transforming from victim to victor, from betrayed wife to empowered guide for others walking similar paths. As darkness fell completely, I remained on the deck, listening to the eternal rhythm of waves against the shore. The beach house stood solid and welcoming behind me, its lights creating a warm glow against the night. My beach house, my sanctuary, my legacy. When my husband's mistress had tried to move into our beach house, I had already changed the ownership. What I couldn't have known then was how completely that single act of self-protection would change everything else in my life, and in the lives of countless women who would find their way to Silver Cove in the decades that followed. The meeting with Vanessa took place exactly as planned, on a crisp October morning at Harbor Point Cafe, the same establishment where we'd had our first face-to-face conversation 20 years earlier. The symmetry wasn't lost on either of us as we settled at a corner table overlooking the water. Time had been kind to Vanessa. At 61, her blonde hair had silvered elegantly, and the confidence she projected was now authentic rather than the careful facade I'd observed during our first meeting. We ordered coffee and spent a few moments with the usual pleasantries before addressing the elephant in the room. "It's strange, isn't it?" she said finally. "Being back here, 2 decades later." "Full circle," I agreed, though I imagine neither of us would have predicted this particular scenario back then. Vanessa smiled ruefully. "No. If someone had told me I'd be sitting here amicably with you after all that happened, I would have thought they were delusional." She paused. "I've never properly apologized to you, Lisa." "Not really. I said I was sorry for my unwitting role in James's schemes, but I never acknowledged the full impact of what happened." "You didn't know I existed," I reminded her. "Not as a present wife, anyway." "That's true," she acknowledged. "But I should have asked more questions, demanded more proof. I wanted to believe him because it was convenient, because I was infatuated." She shook her head. "When I think about how close I came to moving into your family home under such false pretenses." "But you didn't," I pointed out. "And in the end, your cooperation helped ensure James faced appropriate consequences." She nodded thoughtfully. "I've often wondered how differently things might have turned out if I'd been more skeptical from the beginning. Would James have found someone else more willing to accept his story without question? Would he have attempted a different approach to gaining control of the cottage? We can't know," I said. "But I've learned that dwelling on alternate paths is rarely productive. What matters is how we responded to the paths we actually walked." Vanessa studied me with evident respect. "You've built something remarkable from what happened. Your workshops, your book, your consulting practice. You've helped thousands of women protect themselves from situations like ours. As have you through your financial education work," I pointed out. "We approached the same problem from different angles." "Parallel journeys," she mused, echoing the phrase from her email. "Both of us transforming betrayal into purpose." We talked for nearly 2 hours, comparing notes on our respective fields, discussing trends in divorce proceedings, and even sharing a few personal updates. Vanessa had remarried a decade ago to a fellow financial educator. They lived in Chicago, but maintained a small vacation home in Michigan where she had grown up. As our conversation wound down, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small package. "I brought you something, a 20th anniversary gift of sorts." Curious, I unwrapped the package to find a small, exquisite glass sculpture of a beach cottage, detailed right down to tiny wooden shingles and a wraparound deck. "It's beautiful," I said, genuinely touched by the gesture. "It's from an artist in Chicago who specializes in architectural miniatures," Vanessa explained. "I commissioned it based on photos of Silver Cove from your website. I thought it might serve as a reminder of how far we've both come, and how significant that place has been in both our stories, albeit in very different ways." I turned the delicate sculpture, watching how it caught the light. "Thank you. This is unexpectedly perfect." As we prepared to leave, settling the bill and gathering our belongings, Vanessa paused. "Would it be too strange if I asked to see the cottage? The real Silver Cove? I've seen photos on your website, of course, but—" I considered her request, searching for any discomfort and finding none. "Not too strange at all. In fact, I think it would be fitting. A proper closing of the circle." An hour later, I led Vanessa up the path to Silver Cove Cottage. The autumn light cast a golden glow over the weathered gray shingles, and the garden was ablaze with late-season color. I watched her take in the expanded structure, so different from the cottage she had once expected to claim as her own. "It's larger than I remember," she observed. "We've added on over the years," I explained, guiding her toward the deck. "The annex for workshops, the expanded sunroom, the guest cottage for participants who need overnight accommodation." Vanessa stood at the railing, gazing out at the view that had nearly become hers through James's deception. "It's even more beautiful than I remembered," she said softly. "No wonder you fought so hard to keep it." It wasn't just about the property, I told her. It was about principle, about family heritage, about not allowing someone to take what wasn't theirs to give. She nodded. I understand that now, in a way I couldn't possibly have understood then. She turned to face me directly. Thank you for this, for allowing me to see the place that unwittingly changed the course of both our lives. As we completed the tour, ending in the sunroom that now served as a meditation space for workshop participants, Vanessa paused before a framed quotation on the wall. The ownership that matters most is not of things, but of ourselves, she read aloud. Your words? I nodded. From my book. It's the lesson that took me longest to fully grasp. It's perfect, she said. Absolutely perfect. After Vanessa departed, I returned to the deck with a cup of tea, watching the afternoon light play across the water. The glass sculpture she had given me caught the sunlight, creating prisms of color on the table surface. 20 years after James's attempted theft of my property, his former mistress had given me a miniature version of the very cottage she had once expected to claim. Life's symmetry could be breathtaking sometimes. I picked up the delicate sculpture, admiring the artistry and the symbolism it represented. The beach house that had been the site of so much drama had ultimately become sanctuary not just for me, but for countless women seeking to reclaim their lives after betrayal. And now it had come full circle, with Vanessa acknowledging its significance in our shared history. When my husband's mistress had tried to move into our beach house, I had already changed the ownership. What I couldn't have anticipated was how completely that single act of self-protection would transform not only my life, but the lives of so many others, including, in her own way, Vanessa herself. The cottage stood solid and enduring behind me, its presence a constant reminder that sometimes protecting what matters most leads to discovering why it matters at all. 25 years after changing the ownership of my beach house, I celebrated my 75th birthday surrounded by a gathering unlike any I could have imagined when this journey began. The expansive deck at Silver Cove overflowed with people whose lives had intersected with mine through the most unexpected of circumstances, all connected by a single thread of transformation after betrayal. Emma and Daniel, now in their 70s, but still vibrant, had flown in from their retirement home in Arizona. Rachel, my steadfast friend through everything, had organized the entire celebration with her characteristic attention to detail. Catherine had created a memorial book filled with letters from women who had passed through our workshops over the decades. But perhaps most remarkable was Vanessa's presence. Our professional respect had gradually evolved into a genuine friendship. Tentative at first, then increasingly comfortable as the decades softened the sharp edges of our shared history. She had become a regular guest speaker at our workshops, bringing financial expertise that complemented our emotional and strategic guidance. I'd like to make a toast, Rachel announced, raising her glass as the sunset painted the sky in brilliant orange and gold. To Lisa, who taught all of us that the true measure of victory isn't what you keep, but what you build from what you've protected. Glasses clinked as murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathering. I looked around at these faces, some from my professional life, some from my personal circle, many from both, and felt a profound sense of completion. The Silver Cove cottage had expanded one final time 3 years earlier, with the addition of a dedicated library wing housing thousands of resources for women navigating life transitions. What had once been my grandparents' modest beach retreat had evolved into a full-fledged center for women's empowerment, with year-round programming and a small but dedicated staff. After the party wound down and most guests had departed, I found myself sitting on the beach with Emma, Rachel, and Vanessa, 4 women in their 70s, feet buried in cool sand, sharing the comfortable silence of those who no longer need words to communicate understanding. "Did you ever hear what happened to James in the end?" Vanessa asked, breaking the quiet. I shook my head. Not for many years now. I ran into his brother at a financial conference last month, she said. James passed away last year. Heart attack on a golf course in Phoenix. I absorbed this information, searching for any emotional response and finding only a distant acknowledgement. The man whose betrayal had catalyzed such profound change in my life had become almost a theoretical figure over time, significant for his actions' impact, but no longer connected to my daily existence. How do you feel about that, Rachel? Asked gently. Neutral, I answered honestly. His chapter in my story closed so long ago, but I'm grateful for the unexpected doors his betrayal ultimately opened. Emma squeezed my hand. You took what could have destroyed you and built something magnificent instead. As darkness fell completely, we made our way back to the cottage, its windows glowing with welcoming light. I paused at the bottom of the deck stairs, looking up at this place that had been the center of so much. Its weathered shingles and white trim remained fundamentally unchanged despite the expansions, honoring the heritage while serving new purposes. The next morning, I woke early as had become my habit over the years. With most of my birthday guests still asleep, I slipped out for my daily walk along the shore. The tide was out, revealing a wide expanse of wet sand perfect for contemplation. I thought about ownership, how my desperate fight to maintain legal possession of this property had evolved into something far more meaningful. The cottage that James had tried to take from me had become not just my home, but a sanctuary for hundreds of women over the decades, each finding her own path to reclaiming what mattered most. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to steal my beach house for his mistress, James had inadvertently helped create a legacy neither of us could have imagined. If his scheme had succeeded, this place would have remained merely a piece of valuable real estate. Instead, it had become the epicenter of a movement that had changed countless lives, including, most profoundly, my own. As I walked, I spotted something glinting in the wet sand, a perfect scallop shell, iridescent in the morning light. I bent to retrieve it, noting how my body, while slower now, still moved with purpose and strength. 75 years had left their mark, but they had taken nothing essential. I carried the shell back to the cottage, adding it to the collection that had grown over decades of morning walks. Each one represented another day of living intentionally in the life I had reclaimed. Later that day, as the last of my birthday guests prepared to depart, Catherine approached with a small package. This arrived yesterday, she said. From someone named Melissa Thompson. She asked that I give it to you privately. I recognized the name immediately. One of our first workshop participants nearly 20 years earlier. She had arrived devastated by her husband's betrayal and left with a strategic plan that had ultimately saved her family business. Opening the package, I found a simple silver bracelet with a single charm, a miniature beach cottage. The accompanying note was brief. Lisa, 20 years ago, you showed me how to protect what mattered most when everything seemed lost. The strategies I learned at Silver Cove didn't just save my assets, they saved my sense of self-worth, and showed me a path forward I couldn't see alone. My daughter faces a similar situation now. I've sent her your book and encouraged her to attend your next workshop. The legacy of wisdom you created continues across generations. With endless gratitude, Melissa. I slipped the bracelet onto my wrist, touched by this tangible reminder of the ripple effects one strategic decision could create. When I changed the ownership of my beach house 25 years ago, I had been focused solely on keeping what was rightfully mine. I couldn't have known that this single act of self-protection would ultimately create sanctuary for so many others. Standing on my deck as the final cars pulled away, I watched the eternal rhythm of waves against the shore. The beach house that James had tried to give away had found its highest purpose, not as a possession to be transferred, but as a place of transformation and healing. When my husband's mistress attempted to move into our beach house, I had already changed the ownership. What I discovered in the years that followed was that the most important ownership of all was claiming authorship of my own life story. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.